Greetings and salutations. Spencer Kyte, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, back here on SevereMMA's YouTube page with a look at the flyweights in the Fighters to Watch series here for 2023. If you haven't checked out the opening installment of this series on the straw weights that we posted yesterday, please go and check that out. But just in case this is where you're jumping in, welcome. We're glad to have you. Here's what this is. Every year for the past probably 2 or 3 years, I have put together a very comprehensive list of all the athletes on the UFC roster that pique my interest going into a given year inside the octagon. There are going to be obvious names. There are going to be less obvious names. And I will admit, there will be some names that even I'm a little bit embarrassed that I'm still interested in them. And we'll get into a couple of those in this look at the flyweight divisions, because there's a couple of people that just, for whatever reason, I can't bring myself to not be interested in them. I need some help quitting them. We'll get to them shortly. But what it is just a way at the start of the year to go through each weight class one by one, put together a video like this for all of you to take a listen to, take a watch to, maybe get introduced to some fighters that you hadn't been thinking of going into this year, some names that are kind of popping back onto the radar, or just affirming some of your own interests and your own thoughts about some of these men and women in the 125-pound weight class. We're going to do both today, as we will for the bantamweights as well tomorrow. So we're going to start on the distaff side of things. Excuse me, easy for me to say. And so we start with one of those fighters that, like, look, I really can't justify this. I can't explain this better than she is the epitome of a fighter I can't quit, and it is Maria Agapova. I have been intrigued by this woman since she competed on Dana White's Contender Series a couple of years ago, losing to Tracy Cortez. I thought she looked very good early in her UFC run, but it's been not great since, right? It's 2-3 overall in the UFC. She's lost 2 straight. She's 1-3 in her last 4. But yet I'm still here transfixed by the good moments. I'm still here intrigued by the good moments because she's only 25 years old. And in those good moments, we've seen flashes of a fighter that can be something. And now, look, we've seen lots of athletes in lots of different sports that show flashes and it never comes together, that have all the tools and it just never works out. Pick a sport. There are many of them to choose from. And Agapova may just be one of those fighters, right? Maybe she only does have that 3-minute, 4-minute burst in her early in fights when we've seen her look so good. And she didn't look good in her last 2. Again, it hasn't been good. And the Shayna Dobson fight wasn't good, right? Started well, couldn't finish, got beat. Second biggest upset in UFC history in terms of betting line, behind Ronda Rousey and Holly Holm. But, like, it's my list and I'm an absolute sucker for it. And I'm still intrigued. The things that she does well, the moments that you see, those flashes, still really pop to me, still really sort of jump off the screen to me. And maybe it's something as simple as changing up coaching staff, working on some of the fundamentals, retooling her stance and the way she holds her hands and operates in the cage. I know Harry and I, after her last fight, that was a thing we talked about. I'm just not ready to write off a 25-year-old yet. I'm just not ready to say, nope, I'm all done here, because we've seen many different fighters over the years kind of stumble and struggle and it not be great initially, and then something clicks. And she feels like somebody where maybe it just clicks. If she loses another one, she loses another 2, I'm going to have to abandon ship. But for right now, I'm still on board. Excuse me. Pardon me. Next up, Jessica Andrade. She is here in the flyweight list because this is where her next fight is. She's scheduled to face Lauren Murphy at UFC 283 in Brazil later this month. It is a huge fight. She is a contender wherever she goes. She's a former strawweight champion. She's already challenged for the flyweight title, losing to Valentina Shevchenko. A win here probably puts her back in title contention. She could go back to 215 as well. And so to me, she really does fit this nicely because, as Conor McGregor famously once said, it's good to have options. And it feels like Jessica Andrade has options. I think long-term 25 is where she's going to stay and kind of settle in and look to build long-term going forward. But if she can still get down to 115, and we saw that last year, right? We saw that in the Amanda Lemos fight. Back down, had success, looked really good. The ability to go in between and maybe fight in each division once a year, or 2 in one and 1 in the other every year for the next couple of years, gives her that ability to move back and forth and just sort of pick her spots and see where the better matchups are and keep herself in the mix in each weight class. Fight with Murphy is huge. I think it's a super compelling fight because we saw some great stuff from Lauren Murphy last time out. We'll talk about her coming up shortly. But Andrade has been somebody for a number of years that has been on this list, whether I've put it together or not, because you can't just not pay attention to somebody that is a perennial top 5 fighter and a former champion and is able to carry that mantle in 2 weight classes. Next up, Maycee Barber, who is still 24, only turns 25 in May. And as much as there was the period where it felt like Maycee Barber was sort of going to be the poster child for really big hype and it not materializing, right? She went into the Roxanne Modafferi fight. She has the knee injury. She loses that fight to Roxy. She comes back. She loses her next fight out as well. And there was going to be those moments. It felt like there was this moment where maybe this is really going to peter out before it even gets going. Maycee Barber has now won 3 straight. She's 11-2 overall. And last year, it's good wins over Montana De La Rosa and Jessica Ai. The key in those fights to me is that Maycee Barber is starting to understand and fight to who she is as a fighter. She feels really settled in at Team Alpha MMA in Sacramento, working with that group who is going to do a good job of getting her to stick to what works for her. When she struggles, it's when she's outside pretending that she can be a striker. She's not. She's somebody that is just a grinder and needs to be grimy. She's strong. She's physical. Get inside, mash people against the fence, bust them up with elbows, be mean, be dirty, be gritty. It's what works best for her. And while you're at it, while you're prepping that, grab Corey McKenna and tell her to come and do the same thing, right? They trained together there. I talked about McKenna yesterday in the flyweights. She needs to follow the same blueprint. Barber has a fight with Andrea Lee scheduled for March 25th. And I think that's going to be a nice indicator of where she's at. Andrea Lee is sort of settled into place in the division. She is a top 15 fighter, but not really too much higher than maybe 8 is about as high as I'd be willing to go with Andrea Lee, right? We've seen her sort of settle in and land in that spot. Maycee Barber has been projected to be higher. She hasn't gotten there yet. And I think how this fight with Andrea Lee goes, how she's able to, if she's able to dictate the terms of engagement and make it her fight, will tell us a lot about what to expect from her in 2023. And then also sort of more long-term going forward. Speaking of young athletes with incredible upsides, Erin Blanchfield, who on Tuesday at OSDB Sports was listed as my number 1 prospect in the UFC. She is 23 years old. She turns 24 in May. She's 10-1 overall. She's 4-0 in the UFC. She's coming off 2 submission wins in 2022. The first very opportunistic against JJ Aldrich. The one time Aldrich kind of made a mistake, Blanchfield made her pay. The second in Madison Square Garden against Molly McCann, that was absolutely not opportunistic. She went out there and took that one and then gave herself a little dust off the shoulder for the easy work, kind of making what should have been a supportive crowd, but was somehow behind the Scouser, kind of sit up and do the like, all right, well, maybe we should have been cheering for the girl from New Jersey. She's the real deal to me. She has a fight penciled in against Tyler Santos in the middle of February. And that's a huge fight. It's an amazing fight. It honestly, for me, is the right fight at this moment for Erin Blanchfield, which sounds crazy because she hasn't faced the top 10 opponent yet. And now she's going to face the first person in the division to actually be declared the victor in a fight with Valentina Shevchenko. Now, just before everybody freaks out, she won on one of 3 scorecards. Didn't win a fight, didn't beat her, but got the nod from one judge at UFC 275. And it was a close, competitive fight. And now Erin Blanchfield's going to go in there. And we're going to get to see how she handles herself, how she's able to acquit herself against somebody that we have a good sense and a real strong understanding of where they fit in the weight class. This is, to me, the fight to make. It is the right decision. Because if she wins, you're up for a title shot. You're in that position. And yeah, that's quick and it feels crazy that it could be 5 wins and fighting for a title against Shevchenko, who is one of the best pound for pound females ever. But that might be how good Erin Blanchfield is. And if she loses, no stress, right? We took our swing against a more seasoned, more powerful, recent title challenger, and we've got to take a step back and we'll go through sort of the progression of veterans before we jump all the way up. Love the fight. Love Blanchfield as a prospect. May not be able to call her a prospect very much longer. We'll see how things go in February and reassess from there. Next up, Tereza Bleda. She is a 21-year-old Czech fighter who made her debut in November. She lost a couple days before her 21st birthday to Natalia Silva. We'll talk about her shortly. She's one of these athletes, and she was a fighter to watch for me heading into that fight here on the Severe webpage itself, SevereMMA.com. Please check out the site. And the reason she was in there and the reason that she's here is that in terms of the intangibles, in terms of just the raw materials, the measurables, if you will, right? When the tail of the tape rolls out, there's a lot of good stuff there with Bleda. She has good size. She has good physicality for the division. She's just young and raw and hasn't garnered enough experience to really know how to pace herself, how to control herself inside the octagon. And so she's a classic, just have patience, just wait and see. These are the kind of athletes that I really, are the impetus for me doing a series like this, because it's easy for me to come out here and I will talk about Valentina Shevchenko or do the flyweights yesterday, the strawweights yesterday, and talk about Zhang Weili and Rose Namajunas. But it's the fighters like Bleda that are off the radar for most people and coming off a loss that most people are just going to be like, can't even be bothered. Then I want to come out and say, look, a lot of people aren't going to be bothered, but there's something there that piques my interest, so that if one or two of you watching this, and I love every single one of you watching this, gets a little reminder and her name just sticks in your brain, so that when she's booked next, you go, oh yeah, that's that young Czech fighter Spencer mentioned in his Fighters to Watch series. Let me just check this out. It's not so that I have receipts in case somebody pops. It's so that if somebody has success, we all get a chance to watch them. We all get a chance to see them grow and develop and flourish. Because for me, that's the thing I love the most. Like, it's cool for me that over 12, 13 years of covering this sport, I've seen athletes go from making their UFC debut to rising all the way to the top of the division, and then in some cases slide back down. I don't know that Tereza Bleda is going to be one of those people, but I want to watch and see what happens over the next, certainly as we're doing 2023 this year. But this for me is a 2 or 3 year investment at the least, because I think she'll stick around. I think she'll figure some stuff out. I think she'll put some pieces together and be somebody that can eventually have some success. She just needs time. We just need to be patient. Next up, Katlyn Chookagian, the polar opposite to Tereza Bleda. The reason Chookagian is here, and listen, there aren't going to be a lot of really entrenched veterans who are not right at the very top of the list of contenders. And that's where I would say Chookagian is now. I just want to see how that loss to Manon Fiorot, where she missed weight as well, kind of sits with her, how it settles with her. She's been consistent for so long. She has been the number 2 or number 3 in this division for so long that I'm really interested to see if a loss like that is just sort of the equivalent to when she lost to Jessica Andrade and she resets and restarts and resumes being the Katlyn Chookagian we've known all this time? Or is this the start of a slide? Is this the start, after all of these years, after all of these fights, many of which have gone the distance, she's starting to give up her space a little bit? The other interesting thing, and it's one other thing to think about, she started her UFC career at 35. That option is probably always there. And looking at 35 might not be a bad idea. That's a division where there's some openings, where there's some opportunities. And she's going to be in tough against some of the top end of that division. But the top end of that division isn't as tough as it once was. And so I'd be interested to see, and I will be interested to see kind of what this year brings for Chookagian. If it brings a change of address, if it brings the start of a reduction in terms of her level of competition and ability to rise to that level, or whether that fight with Manon Fiorot is just that she's in there with, in fact, as her nickname says, the beast, and it's just a one-off loss. Brings us to Tracy Cortez, 10-1 overall, 4-0 in the UFC, a 10-fight winning streak. She was slated to face Amanda Ribas in Orlando last month, was pulled by the commission for undisclosed reasons. And she came out afterwards and said, look, I want to be clear. I didn't withdraw. I was pulled. I will share why. We will explain why when the time is right. We haven't had that time yet. Clearly, it hasn't been right yet. I hope it's nothing serious. I hope that Tracy Cortez is able to come back and compete fairly soon, because this feels like a big movement year for her. This feels like a year where she's going to get some opportunities, and if she can make the most of them, she's going to go forward. Right? The fight with Amanda Ribas was essentially that fight times 2. Like it was that fight for each of them. And so, provided she's able to return in a reasonable time, we'll see who she gets matched up with, but the opportunity is there. Listen, 4-0 in the UFC, 10-fight winning streak. Those things are important. She holds a win, suspect as it may be, questionable, debated split decision as it is, over Erin Blanchfield. That has aged really nicely. That has a lot of weight right now. So let's see what happens with her when she comes back. Was really looking forward to that fight with Ribas. I hope something gets rebooked. We'll get to Ribas in a little bit. She is booked for something going forward, so it's not going to be Tracy Cortez. We'll see what's up. We'll find out what the situation was, and we'll see where she's at coming forward. Brings us to Manon Fiorot, who I already talked about a little bit, defeated Katlyn Chookagian in her second fight of last year. Her first fight, she got a unanimous decision win over Jennifer Maia. So 2 fights last year against former title challengers, beat them both. She is the number 1 contender. She's 5-0 in the UFC, 10-1 overall. It seems like she's headed towards a title fight with Valentina Shevchenko. Now, I am scheduled to talk with the flyweight champion here at some point later this week for UFC.com. That story will be up as soon as I am done talking to Valentina and putting it together. I hope to get some clarity from her as to who she believes she will be fighting or who she would like to fight. But it seems like it's going to be Fiorot. She's just, right, you beat Chookagian. That should be the step, because to me, there's limited choices as to who's next. It's Fiorot or it's Alexa Grasso, and Fiorot's win is the better win. She's super intriguing because she's big and strong, right? It's as simple as that. She's really good size for this division, really good skill set, really good overall kind of diversity of attack. We haven't really seen her too much on the ground, But some of that is because she is a big, strong woman that doesn't get taken down. Kick game is on point. We've seen the power in the early wins in the UFC. We've seen the ability to go 15 hard minutes. She would probably need to go 25 hard to beat Shevchenko. But it's really interesting, especially with what happened with Valentina last year, and we'll get to her later on. Really curious to see if this is the fight that gets made first and foremost, and then what it looks like when they do get in there. Next up, as we continue on with the fighters to watch for 2023 in the women's flyweight division, is Melissa Gatto, who lost last time out to Tracy Cortez in May. It's her first pro loss, and she was pulled from a fight in September, undisclosed reasons. So she comes into this year 26, 8-1-2 overall. She's shown flashes of being dangerous. Like those first couple wins in the UFC were good wins, good finishes. Sijara Eubanks, not an easy person to get out of there, but it was a very good win. But she didn't really have many answers for Cortez's wrestling. She now sort of, to me, feels a little bit like a really good in top position, but if you put her on her back, it's a little bit easier to dictate terms, and she's kind of happy to hang out there and maybe look for one or two things, but not even with that much zeal. The big reason she's on this list for me is I just want to see what kind of improvement she makes, right? That's her first pro loss. Those things usually have a way of changing your outlook, of forcing you to really look at things, right? Because prior to this, it's the old if it ain't broke. Nobody's beaten me. Nobody's dominated me. Yes, I've got 2 draws, but never been in there where my hand wasn't raised. Now she's dealt with that. Now she's had to go back and look at that footage and work with her team and say, what went wrong? What do we need to improve? And so for me, from a analyst standpoint, from an observer standpoint, I want to see what she fixed up. I want to see what the next step is. She should get a slight step back in competition in terms of opponent. So can she go out there, get a victory, get moving forward again? Or is Cortez sort of where the ceiling sits for the Brazilian? Next up, Alexa Grasso, the other contender, as I mentioned, in mentioning Manon Fiorot. So 2-0 in 2022 with wins over Joanne Wood and Vivi Araujo. She is 4-0 since moving to flyweight. As I said, I think she's just a little bit behind Manon Fiorot in the title queue. As good as the wins over Wood and Araujo are, it's just not the same as beating Katlyn Chookagian. But the thing with Grasso that has been really great to see, especially since she's moved to this weight class, figured out the weight stuff that was a hindrance for her when she was fighting at 115, is that she knows who she is and she fights to her strengths now. So she uses that footwork and movement and good quick hands and crisp boxing. She mixes up a little bit of clinch work. She mixes up a little bit of takedowns. And she just plays on the good conditioning and the ability to work at a good pace and just touch you up at all times. At strawweight, she wasn't always the faster fighter. And it got her. And a little bit of that was just age too, right? Excuse me. A little bit of that was just age. We got to remember, Alexa Grasso is just now on the cusp of turning 30. She's been doing this for a while and doing it at this level for a while. And so she's the quintessential. It took some time to get all the way to where we expected her to be when she was 22, 23, 24, coming up in Invicta and early UFC days. I'm really curious to see what the next matchup is, because I do think Fiorot and Shevchenko is the fight. We've got Andrade and Murphy booked. Does she get Katlyn Chookagian? That's an interesting fight in terms of the dynamics of it. I wouldn't necessarily be super excited about it if I'm Grasso's team, but it might be the only thing that's out there for her. If that's the case, but take it, see what happens. Regardless, I think we need to see her in kind of late Q1, early Q2, so that it doesn't get too far down the year and this momentum is lost. right? She's coming off a main event. It wasn't booked initially as the main event. It graduated into being the main event when Jared Cannonier and Sean Strickland was postponed, but she's coming off a main event win. Get back out there, see if you can keep this going, get another good assignment, get another good name opposite you, and keep moving forward. Keep your place in the queue. Next up, Miranda Maverick, another one of these sort of 25 and under fighters who I dubbed the Flyweight 4 in that OSDB piece I mentioned earlier today. 25 years old, as I said, 11-4 overall, 4-2 in the UFC. She's won her last two. You could call her 5-1 in the UFC, and I wouldn't be mad at you. I still think she beat Macy Barber in that very close fight. But regardless of that, she had a nice bounce back year last year, and she's still clearly improving. She connected with Elliot Marshall, originally the team at Elevation, but it's now sort of Elliot Marshall as her head coach, and she's working with the cast of women that train out in the Denver area and surrounding area, Easton Training Center, few different other places. You can see that the work is there. She started working with that group going into the Erin Blanchfield fight. She didn't win that fight. She got handled in that fight. Fine. Erin Blanchfield's terrific. Can't sit like we're not sitting here and disparaging people because they lost Erin Blanchfield. Erin Blanchfield's great. But in those next two fights, we've seen the improvements, right? She had the very good win over Sabina Mazo. She had a dominant victory over Shayna Young last time out. Thought she would have got a finish. She was hunting for one. She wanted to get one. It didn't come about, but it was still a good win nonetheless. She's one of these athletes to me, and she's as much, maybe not quite as much as Blanchfield, but more so than the other four. The one that I think has the greatest upside because she's a very good athlete. She's very strong. She's physical. She's got a bunch of the intangibles. She's super intelligent, really thoughtful and analytical about her career and what she does and the work she's doing. And it just like it to me, it just comes down to application and experience. The more she works with Elliot, the more they get used to each other and they build on some of these good camps and good performances, the more she's going to step up. As with a bunch of these fighters on this list thus far, the next assignment is critical. And it may be telling in terms of, you know, sort of what the UFC thinks of her. She really wanted a fight with Molly McCann, who we'll talk about next. She probably still wants it, but it doesn't really feel like the best fight, given that Molly's coming off that loss. And so we'll see what the UFC decides to do. She deserves a step up in competition. The Shayna Young fight was a situation where that was the only available option. She wanted to fight. Young was the only person that said yes. And so she said, fine, let's go. And it got rescheduled and rebooked and all kinds of stuff. She's going to take whoever the UFC gives her. And so I think who the UFC is able to get across from her is going to be really interesting to see, because it'll tell us what others in the division think of Miranda Maverick, and maybe a little bit about what the UFC thinks of Miranda Maverick as well. As I mentioned, we move to Molly McCann. She's here just because I'm so curious to see how she bounces back after getting smoked by Erin Blanchfield at Madison Square Garden. Right? That was a big deal. Last year was a big deal for Molly McCann. She had those two knockout victories in London. Her star rose, her profile rose alongside Patty Pimblett. She went into MSG. She was the people's favorite. She was getting cheered, getting loved, soaking it all in. And she stepped out into that octagon and had zero. And listen, as I just said with Miranda Maverick, I'm not somebody that's going to fault you for losing to Erin Blanchfield. She is that good. I think that highly of her. But what I will say is that it was one-sided in the worst ways possible. It was Blanchfield just identifying exactly how to beat Molly McCann and going out and doing that. And so now we've got to see what that loss after those two victories does to her from a psyche standpoint, from a mindset standpoint, and a confidence standpoint when she gets back out there. There is a lane for Molly McCann to just be a beloved mid-pack talent that thrives, right? show up in London every year, book one or two others against sort of a little bit better than the group that she beat last year in Luana Carolina and Hannah Goldie, but similar to the fighters that she had been facing, right? The Jiyeon Kims of the world. She can just thrive in that lane if she's given the opportunity to do so. And so matchmaking is going to be key, but I'm super curious to see what 2023 looks like for Meatball, because 2022 went really well until it didn't. And the until it didn't part is going to be really tricky to come back from, I think. Next up, Juliana Miller, Juju, the Tough 30 winner from last season, 26 years old, just 3-1 overall as a professional. She hasn't fought yet since the finale. Neither has her heavyweight counterpart, Muhammad Usman. But she made progress throughout the show. I watched the show. I did the recaps for UFC.com. I still enjoy The Ultimate Fighter. Sorry. I know. Listen, the stuff in the house I don't care about. There's not bickering anymore. I like getting to know these new athletes, and I like seeing them progress, and I like seeing what they do with coaches. I like seeing how they interact with coaches, and do they learn and do they grow? And Juju grew. We saw it in the season. She developed. Her confidence got bigger. She trusted in her skills more, and she went out and fought 3 good fights to win that season. She's scrappy. She's got good jiu-jitsu. She's got good size, a good reach for the division. She's starting to reach that point of believing in herself and believing in her abilities. She's a long-range prospect. Listen, 26 years old, 4 fights in. We're not expecting her to suddenly race out and be a contender by the end of this year. I want to see the post-Tough debut. I want to see her in there against somebody that's got 2 or 3 fights in the UFC and just see what that test looks like. See what that one looks like, and then we'll move to the next one. This is another one of those sort of similar to Teresa Bleda, long-term projects. Talk to me about Juju in 3 years. Let me just see what happens as she continues to work, as she continues to learn, she continues to develop. She works with a good crew. Manny Hernandez and them out in San Diego made Liz Carmouche a contender in the UFC and a champion in Bellator. Juju's working with them. She's got some upside. Pay attention and just let's let this one percolate for a while. Which brings me to Lauren Murphy. We mentioned a couple times already. She looked so much better in her fight against Miesha Tate. And I don't mean that like just in the sense of like compared to her last fight, because her last fight before that was the fight with Valentina Shevchenko where she looked terrible. But she looked so much better. Her hands looked so much better. She was so much more fluid and aggressive, and it wasn't as static. And I give a ton of credit for that to my guy, Sean Madden, who had been working with her and is working with her again ahead of this fight. And that victory just got me curious once more and sort of made me start wondering, can she take over the Chukagian role a little bit? Can she be that veteran at the very top of the division that the Alexa Grassos and Miranda Mavericks and eventually maybe Natalia Silva or Amanda Hebos is going to have to go through at some point? Because we know she's tough as shit. We know she doesn't go away easy. Even when it's going terrible, she just wants to keep going back out there. This is a huge fight with Andrade. If she wins that, she's right back in the mix. She is right back into contention. And so that one's going to be really informative, really instructive about where 2023 goes for Lauren Murphy. But I'm curious again. This is why I watch all of them and care about all of them. One performance can change the way I think about you and others think about you. And that performance against Miesha Tate did that. So I want to see if she's able to build on it, how she's able to build on it later this month in Brazil against Andrade. We land on Casey O'Neill, the 25-year-old Scottish Australian prospect, 9-0 overall, 4-0 in the UFC, tore her ACL in April, so she's not quite a full year on the mend. She will be back at some point this year, for sure. She's already doing things and in the gym a little bit at Extreme Couture. She was out ahead of the pack before the injury, right? She got the win over Roxanne Modafferi in February of last year. That put her into the top 10 and sort of established her just a step ahead of Blanchfield, Barber, and 2 steps ahead of Maverick. And now she's fallen back a little bit. Blanchfield has raced forward to sort of catch up to her. But when she's back, she's going to have a big fight on her plate. She looked so good in these 4 fights. Finished the first 3. Ignore the fact that the result against Modafferi says split decision. That was some terrible judging in Texas. It was a one-sided fight. There's no way that was a split decision. Should have been a unanimous decision for Casey O'Neill. She will get somebody in that top 10 when she returns, whether that's Q2 or Q3. And I want to see how she looks, right? ACL repairs are far more common in sports these days, but there's still major surgeries. And in a sport where you got to move and takedowns and defend and all these different things, like, just let's see what it looks like. The upside is there. We know it. It is abundant. She could be a contender, maybe as soon as the end of this year. If she's back to full health, she fights in Q2, grabs another one later in the year, pushes that winning streak to 6, she's in the mix. Let's just see it. Definitely somebody to watch. As is Amanda Ribas, who now looks like she's officially moving up to 25. She lost a competitive fight to Caitlin Chikagian last year. Still not really sure where she fits, and that's sort of what I'm waiting to find out this year. As I mentioned earlier, the fight with Tracy Cortez felt to me like it was going to be the clarify some things about each of these women. It didn't materialize. It fell apart. Amanda Ribas is now booked to face Vivi Araujo in March at UFC 285. That's a competitive fight. That's a great fight. That's a tell me where you stand fight. Because Araujo is coming off a main event assignment with Grasso. She has been in the top 10 for a little bit. We're going to find out. And listen, I'm the first to admit, and I think I talked about it a great deal going into that fight card in Orlando in December. I might just be fanboying a little bit because I have a lot of time for Amanda Ribas. She is full of energy and brightness and light and joy and makes me smile every time I see her. I see her smiling, right? See that effervescent personality, and I can't help smile and root for her and want to see good things. And so maybe I'm wrapped up in that, in thinking that she could be a potential contender. I think this is the year we find out. I'll be a little bit heartbroken if she isn't, but still, I want to find out. I like finding out answers. It's why I do a series called One Question for Every Fight. Answers are important. I want to see Amanda Ribas get some answers this year. We move on to another fighter I can't quit in Jillian Robertson. It's not that she's Canadian and I'm Canadian because she lives in Florida and not disavowed Canada, but like, yeah, she's Canadian, but she's lived in the States for a long time. It's not because she beat Rose Namajunas on the weekend in a grappling match. Submission grappling is very different than professional fighting. But it is that the grappling is so good that it just really feels like, oh my God, if she could ever figure it out, if she could ever put pieces together a little bit better, could she be interesting? And the other note I have written down here is, can she just be like a female version of Chris Lytle? And for people that are much younger than me and don't know or remember Chris Lytle, one, shame on you. Go look up Chris Lytle fights on Fight Pass. Action, entertainment, forever. Can she be that? Can she be somebody that is just competing 3-4 times a year, winning 2 or 3 of those, putting on fun, exciting fights? You know what you're going to get. I always talk about there being time and space and room for those kinds of athletes. Can she be that in this division? And if she does start figuring some more stuff out and putting some more pieces together and working on those entries and those takedown attempts and just getting to a point where I just need to get sticky on you and I can I can get into my grappling bag. Can she advance? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be much better than it is, but I'm still really interested to watch Jillian Robertson fight every single time she's booked, because there have been some really good performances. Even if it's 500, even if it's every 1 out of 2, we win one, we lose one, I'll be watching. She's interesting to me. She's worth a watch. Entertaining fighters are good fighters to watch. Just like, seriously. I don't understand why people don't like entertaining fighters. She is one. Brings us to Taila Santos, who challenged for the flyweight title this year in a competitive fight with Valentina Shevchenko, as I mentioned earlier. First fighter to get the nod over Shevchenko at 125. Again, 1 out of the 3 scorecards, but it was a split decision. First time Valentina Shevchenko has been to a split decision at flyweight. The really interesting part of this is just, as you can assume, how does she respond? As we mentioned, she's booked now to fight Erin Blanchfield. That's maybe not a slap in the face after fighting for the title and coming as close as it feels that she did in moments of that fight. Like, that fight kind of switched at one point. At one point, it felt like Taila Santos was just going to run to the title and run through Valentina Shevchenko and dominate the fight. That didn't happen. But now you're fighting this 23-year-old on the come up, which has got to be kind of motivating from a sense of like, oh, okay, this is what you're doing. You think she's going to come and now beat me, and that's how she's going to get going forward. So I'm super interested to see what that fight looks like and who Taila Santos is this year, coming off of, regardless of the result, right? That fight against Valentina in Singapore is an overall plus. It is an overall victory. So you have to take positives from it. What she looked like this year, what she looked like against Blanchfield. So fascinating. God, I love fights. Brings us to Shevchenko, lost on 1 scorecard versus Taila Santos, as mentioned. She turns 35 in March. She has won 9 straight overall at 25. She is 23-3 for her career. She is one of the greatest female fighters of all time. But is she slipping? Oh, this is the question, right? Was that a one-off? Was that a blip? Or was that the start of a slide? The only way to know is to see her compete again, right? We talked about this on the takeaways. I asked Harry and he said, we don't know. And the only way to know is to see her compete again. As usual, he is right. And his measured response is the correct one. But it is one of the myriad reasons that I am so intrigued and so eager to see Shevchenko fight again. Because that was the first time we saw some give back, somebody come out there and take the fight to her at flyweight. We hadn't really seen that since really, truly the first Amanda Nunes fight, because the second fight was competitive throughout. It was just those first 2 rounds of the first fight with Nunes where we saw that. And so to see Taila Santos come out and have that kind of success, now we just need to see Val back and figure some of this out. Hopefully it happens sooner rather than later. Hasn't fought since June. We're not sure why. I'm going to ask when I talk to her, going to get the update. Stay tuned to UFC.com for those updates. We're going to find out. It's really curious. She's on the list of most intriguing fighters for me for 2023. 2 left. Unrelated Silvas. The first is Karine Silva, who is a graduate of the class of 2021 from Dana White's Contender Series. She fought this year, made her debut last year. As I said yesterday, going to make that mistake. Got a first round submission win over Poliana Botello with a Darce choke. It was a good finish. It was a really nice finish. She got a showcase opportunity in that. She's won 6 straight overall. She's 29. I just need to see more before I make a real assessment. Like, 1 win isn't going to be enough for me to decide, yes, you're a contender. Here's where you are. I want to see the increased level of competition. I want to see kind of her figuring some things out, what she builds on, how much she develops, 29 is a little bit older, but she hasn't fought a ton. It's older in terms of prospect. It's not old in terms of overall. It's older in terms of just touching down in the UFC and having a limited amount of experience. But she looked good in that debut. So let's just, again, same as I've said throughout this first 45 minutes. I like just getting additional looks and making sure I'm invested in people to see those looks and reminding myself and others that we just need to see a little more from some of these athletes. Last one for the women is Natalia Silva, who had a pair of fights in her rookie campaign last year. She looked really good. One of the most intriguing fighters of the year for me because those two fights were great. She's 26 in February. She's 14-5-1 overall. She's won 8 straight. And we just, again, can't quite say how good she is, where she fits, what the ceiling is. Like in terms of the effort, beating Jazz Davicius and Teresa Bleda are good wins. They're solid wins. Okay, you beat up some Contender Series alums. Now let's see what the next step is. Can you carry over those flashes when you get in there with someone that's more experienced, when you get that step up in competition? Because there's still moments of being green and poor decision making, but she seems to have all the tools. The finish on Bleda was great. The spinning back kick to the face. It's great. Let's see what happens when she takes that step up in competition. Sorry, excuse me. Battling a little bit of a cold here as we kick off 2023. And we move over to the men's side of things for the fighters to watch. I am Spencer Kyte. This is SevereMMA's YouTube page. 125-pound weight class for the guys. Super intriguing division. Lots of good names. Lots of good fighters. We should be able to get through this in under 45 minutes, though. We're going to reset here on some water, and then we'll get into it. All right, we kick things off. As always, we go in alphabetical order. This is not a hierarchy. This is not a rankings. This is A to Z, and that's how we do. So the first one is Amir Albazi. 4-0 in the UFC, 5-fight winning streak overall. He's in the top 10. He's rising, but he's still somewhat untested. Through no fault of his own, right, was supposed to fight Alex Perez, then Brandon Royval. Each of those guys were scratched. Ends up fighting Alessandro Costa last time out, gets a 3rd-round stoppage win. It's that piece that he's in the top 10 and yet hasn't really beaten anybody of great substance. And I say that with no disrespect to the people he's fought, but he's in the top 10 without beating a top 15 opponent. And those athletes, and there's a bunch of them in the UFC, in the rankings, that are in that position, are always a little bit more curious to me because I just want to see it. I just want that confirmation. I think he has all the talent in the world. I think he is a top 5 guy. I think he's somebody that's going to be a contender in this division as soon as the end of this year. But he needs a big fight. He needs one of those fights rebooked. Maybe it's Brandon Royval, right? Maybe he recovers from the wrist injury. We can lock that up for March in London or April. That'd be great. Let's get one of those fights. Let's get one of those bigger names. Kai Kara France, if he's healthy, if the knee injury isn't too bad, and he's able to jump in there at some point in the late stages of Q1, early stages of Q2. Get Albazi a big fight. Let's see how good the Prince really is. Next is Alessandro Costa, who I mentioned, fought Amir Albazi on very short notice. He looked okay early on. Like, he's a guy that he was the first fight of the season on season 6 in 2022 of Contender Series. He got a split decision win, wasn't invited back, didn't get a contract, then was brought back up on short notice to face Albazi. He's 27 at the end of the month. Let's just get another look before we decide where he fits, right? As it says in my note, classic give him another shot fighter for me. Love watching these type of athletes. There were little good moments, but it's hard to ask somebody to go out there on real short notice and face a top 15 opponent in your UFC debut. Let's pull him back. Let's get him in there with somebody else that's coming off a loss. See where he's at. Next up is the champ, Deiveson Figueiredo. First thing to mention here with Figueiredo is that he's 35 now, which feels crazy. And he's headed into a fourth fight with Brandon Moreno later this month in Brazil. I just don't know with Figueiredo right now. And that's part of the reason he's on this list. Listen, champion is always going to be on this list. But part of it is that I just don't know. Because like the draw in the first fight with Moreno is because he lost a point. In the second fight, where he loses, he just looked disinterested. He looked like you knew when he walked into that octagon that Brandon Moreno was winning that fight. He just looked like he didn't give a shit about being there. Third fight was competitive, but I thought Figueiredo won pretty clearly. I thought he was the better man, but now he's been away for a year. And at this age, with the miles that he has on, with how hard he fights every time, it starts to become a question for me of like, how much longer can he do this? He's been mostly outstanding, but like at some point, everybody slips. You start losing ground at some point. You can't be dominant forever. That's not how it works. Moreno's beaten him once and beat him handily at that. We're going to get answers to this in a couple weeks' time. I am geeked for this fight. I can't wait. I think this division, as I said at the end of last year and all the way into now, this division is going to be front and center for at least the first quarter of the year. This fight is amazing. I want to see what Figueiredo looks like because he's a guy that, to me, if he's right, he can continue to rule this division for another 2-3 years or go up and fight at bantamweight where, Jesus, you add that guy to the mix. Let's go. Or he could come out and look like he just doesn't give a shit anymore. We're going to find out in a couple of weeks. Can't wait to see it. Next up, Jake Hadley, member of the 2021 graduating class from Dana White's Contender Series. He stumbled out of the gate against Alan Nascimento, but corrected things in his second showing, getting a very good submission win over Carlos Candelario. He's now 9-1. There's tons of upside, but it all just comes down to mindset with Jake Hadley. Like, it all just comes to figuring out how to play to your strengths and just not give a shit about anything else, right? Don't go out there and think that you're a striker. You're a grappler, son. Go out and grapple. Doesn't mean you just dive for naked takedown attempts and be stupid about it. But like that second fight, right? The win against Carlos Candelario. The grappling's on point. Really sharp. The Cage Warriors success. The grappling's on point. Really sharp. The Contender Series win against Mitch Raposo. The grappling is on point. Go out and grapple. He could be a future contender. I thought that when I saw him on Contender Series and went back and looked at some of the Cage Warriors fights. I've talked to the guys here who watched him throughout that progression. Feel the same way. Tons of upside. But it's between the ears. Figure it out. If he puts it together, if he plays to his strengths, if he finds his lane and just stays in it, this kid could be in the top 15 before the year is out, if not the top 10. He's that good. Potential to be that good. He could also just never quite figure it out. So we're going to see. We're going to pay attention in 2023 and see what happens. Next up, Manel Kape. My first note, and I want to read this one specifically. I think I said it when we recapped his last fight, but God, I wish he was as great as we all wanted him to be. Like, I wish he wanted to be as great as we all want him to be, right? We've seen the best elements of him. There are some really great elements. But then he also goes out there in his last fight and he's dribbling between his legs and he's, imaginary basketball and playing and not really going out there and finishing David Dvorak when he has opportunities. Those things are going to cost you. Those things, like, you can't do that at this level, not as you're progressing up the ranks. Sure, you can do it against David Dvorak and still get a win, and that's a very good win. I think very highly of David Dvorak, even though he's lost a couple in a row now. Still think very highly with him. But like, we're gonna find out. Like, Manel Kape stumbled out of the gate, right? Lost his first two UFC fights, Pantoja and Matheus Nicolau. He's got a fight. He's jumping in for Kyte France against Alex Perez. That has been pushed back towards the end of March. That's going to tell us everything we need to know about Manel Kyte. Because Alex Perez, since that title fight, has fought once. He's missed weight a bunch of times. He's been pulled from fights, all kinds of different stuff. The one time he did appear against Pantoja, just got trucked. If you're this, if Kyte is the guy that he says he is and that he carries himself to be, he goes out and dominates. And if not, I think we have to reassess. I think we have to stop talking about him as a potential contender and look at him more as a guy that is happy to go out there and be pretty good and a showman rather than the best and taking away some of the bullshit. Brings us to Kyte France. Mentioned earlier, supposed to fight Alex Perez, knee injury, out of that fight, get well soon. Kai, really curious to see what happens in his next fight because he's coming off the loss to Brandon Moreno, right? So he looked good in March against Askar Askarov, hitting him his first loss, fights Moreno, has some good moments, but gets stung, gets blasted to the body, and is just finished. He's a guy in this division that can be a difference maker because he has that power. He has that legit one shot, sit you down, shift the momentum things. And he continues to shore up all the other pieces, right? He's looked good as we've seen progression throughout his UFC career. Hopefully, as I said earlier, the knee injury isn't too serious. It's not something that keeps him out for far too long. We get to see him once or twice this year to get an assessment, to get a sort of resetting of where he is in this division. He's a top 10 guy. Get well soon. Get back here. You make this division better. Continue on. Muhammad Mokaev, 3-0 in 2022. The Rookie of the Year runner-up for me behind Jack Dalla Maddalena. There's worlds of upside here for Mokaev. He's one of the most decorated amateurs to come into the sport. He's looked really good, but it's one of those things, and we talked about it after his last performance against Malcolm Gordon. He just needs to, similar to Jake Hadley, just go out and handle your business. There's no need to piss about. There's no need to play with your food. That Malcolm Gordon fight was way tougher than it needed to be because he was wanting to play to the crowd and he was wanting to chase fancy stuff and striking finishes. And he got put in some really tough spots. And look, he did all the things you want to do. He did all the right things in terms of escaping those moments and defending well and getting out of the tricky situations. And those things all build character, but they should also tell you to stop fucking around. And your coaches should look at them and show them to you and go, okay, Mo, stop fucking about. Because when you do you and you grapple and you put these dudes on the canvas, you're lights out. And he's lights out. He's 21 years old. The world is this man's oyster. Tougher tests are coming. We're going to see how he handles them. He's going to get a step up in competition whenever he fights for the first time. I believe he just had some, shoulder surgery. So March in London is up in the air a little bit. He has the ability to just march to the title. Just the next 2 or 3 years, if it even takes that long, just keep cruising through people. He's that good. He can be that good. Let's see if he gets there. Next up, and this is one of the more curious ones this year overall, Jeff Molina. So first, the sort of setup, the bio. Dana White Contender Series class of 2020, 3-0 in the UFC, 11-2 overall. Tons of upside. Good boxing. We've seen some toughness. We've seen some heart. In his debut against a Ricky Lang, he needed to win the third round, and he came out and he won the third round going away. Love those kind of things. His career is in a real weird fucking spot right now. He is in a predicament because he has been suspended by the Nevada State Athletic Commission I can't remember the word. The word's escaping me. In connection to, there we go, the James Krause story, the James Krause betting situation, his involvement there. So we don't know when we're going to see Jeff Molina next. And that's really unfortunate. He had a fight booked. He got pulled from that. He was supposed to be facing, I believe, Jimmy Flick. That got pulled. Flick's facing someone else. Jeff Molina is just on the shelf right now. Suspended indefinitely. A promising career put on pause. I want to just keep watching to see what happens. I want to know more about the James Krause story. I think it is one that is going to dominate this year and be a big story all year long. I want to know more about Molina's involvement, other people's involvement. He's a good kid. I've had a chance to talk to him a couple of times. Really like him. Great personality. Think the world of him as a prospect, as somebody that can flourish in this division and in this sport. But he appears to have put himself in a really bad spot. And so we're going to see over this year how that plays out, what that means for him. Brings us to Brandon Moreno, set to fight Deiveson Figueiredo for the 4th time later this month. He got a win last year in an interim title fight against Kyte at UFC 277 to formally set up this quadrilogy with Deiveson Figueiredo. He too, like Molina, is in a little bit of a murky situation just in terms of his training situation, right? He moved to Glory MMA and Fitness to work with James Krause after the loss to Deiveson Figueiredo last year. That's not happening anymore. So he's 1-1-1 against this guy he's going to fight in a couple of weeks' time down in Brazil. Can he beat him when they're both on their best days? Right? I said earlier in talking about Figueiredo, he came into that second fight and he looked like he didn't give a shit, and Brandon Moreno cruised. In the 2 fights where Figueiredo seemed locked in, Moreno landed on the wrong side of the results on 1. Would have been 2 if not for a point deduction. There is no denying that this man is a supremely talented fighter. He is currently the 1B and is at worst the number 2 in this division overall. We're just gonna find out here in a couple of weeks if he can be the 1A. That makes him really intriguing. Makes him somebody I want to watch this year. The same, but for very different reasons, holds true for Carlos Mota. He is a classic give him another fight or 2 guy for me. Debuted on 4 days notice against Cody Durden. Lost, whatever. It's 4 days notice. It's impossible to expect great performances from people on 4 days notice, regardless of how good, talented, skilled, experienced, any of those things they are. To have you roll into the UFC 4 days before you're going to make your debut against somebody that's been here for a couple of years, we can't expect the moon of these people. We can't expect amazing things of these people in these situations. So Carlos Mota gets a pass on that one. 27 years old, former LFA champ, 8-2 overall. Let's just see what a full camp, next assignment, then we make the decision. Let's just see. If he loses, fine. We can make an assessment. If he wins, now we're a level playing field. Let's score the 3rd one. This is why I do this list, because there's a lot of people that probably do not care about Carlos Mota. But if he goes out and he looks great on a full camp next time, we'll be wondering where he came from and who is this guy, and do we need to pay attention? Yes, pay attention. The loss to Cody Durden, just throw that one away. It had 4 days notice, man. Let's remember those things this year. 2023. Let's pledge to remember those things this year. Give people grace for their circumstances, for their situations. Not rush to judgment. Take our time with this. We've got all the time in the world. We got 62 more days as of when I'm recording this. Let's take our time with it. Brings me to Alan Nascimento, who I mentioned earlier. Defeated Jake Hadley last year. Lost to Tahir Ulanbekov in his debut. It was a split decision. I think he should have won that fight. So he should be 2-0 in the UFC. He has a fight on deck against Carlos Hernandez, who is a Dana White Contender Series grad who won a split decision in his debut. Nascimento is one of those guys. He's he's another one of these guys that are the reason that I do these pieces, that I do this series, that I love this series, that I pay attention to all of this stuff. He could just be a late arriving veteran that shakes up the division a little bit. He looked really good against Ulanbekov. As I said, I thought he won that fight, and Ulanbekov's a ranked fighter. He dominated Jake Hadley, and I think highly of Jake Hadley. He's working with a great team, the Shootbox Diego Lima crew with Charles Oliveira. It's one of the blonde hair crew. Skilled on the ground. He is a dangerous guy. I wish he was getting more of a step up in competition. I wish he was getting someone a little further ahead in the rankings than Carlos Hernandez, another guy coming off Contender Series. But look, just don't overlook Alan Nascimento this year. Just do yourself a favor. Remember the name. Pay attention to him. Let's just, this just might be a guy. Also might be a guy, Matheus Nicolau. We did our takeaways, the year-end takeaways, myself, Harry, Ian O'Neill. And as we went through different divisions, we talked about, who are some of the people that are a little bit under the radar that, might be, that really kind of stand out for us, right? And when we talked about flyweights, this was my pick. He just might be the best fighter in this division. And I know there are going to be people that say, well, pump the brakes, homeboy. He turns 30 in 2 days. He's 19-2-1 overall, 7-1 in the UFC in 2 stints, 4-0 since returning. And those wins are Manel Cape, Tim Elliott, David Dvorak, and Matt Schnell. Dude's good. He's just really good. There's not a lot of holes. There's not many holes at all. Has some power, good on the ground. Dark horse contender to me, showing improvements. Might be the best flyweight in the division. We're going to find out in 2023. I can't wait. I'm so excited to see him compete. Get some of these top 5 opponents, get some of these big matchups, and just answer the questions. Next up, Alexandre Pantoja. God, I love this man. That fight with Alex Perez last year, his first fight back after the knee injury, after being in line for a title shot against Brandon Moreno, was just phenomenal. Just came out and said, no, we're not even pretending this is competitive. We're not wasting our time feeling each other out. I'm climbing on your back. I'm taking your neck, and I'm going home. Fascinating fighter in this division to me. 2 wins over Brandon Moreno. Beat him in the house on The Ultimate Fighter when they were in there for, I believe it was the Unbeatens, as they all sort of fought towards facing, not the Unbeatens, all the flyweight champions as they fought towards facing Demetrius Johnson at the time. Tim Elliott won the season. And then he beat him in the UFC as well before Brandon Moreno got let go for that brief period that he got let go. He lost to Deiveson Figueiredo at UFC 240. It was a good fight. It was a competitive fight. He might get the winner of this upcoming flyweight title fight. It would be deserved. As I said, he was in line, and then he suffered a knee injury. That got us the second fight that got us the third fight in the trilogy that is now going to be a quadrology. Let's just see. He might get the winner. He might have to face Nicolau. He might have somebody else. Like, it's just good options. Like, just give me Alexandre Pantoja fights. I want to watch them. I want to watch him compete regularly. I love seeing him compete. And he's very much in the mix, in the top of this division. So let's just get him back out there in a really big fight to start his 2023, whenever that is. Next up, Alex Perez. Talked about him a little bit here tangentially on the sides already. Former title challenger, subbed quickly upon return from a long layoff, as I said, against Pantoja. Booked to face Manel Cape on March 25. That one's going to tell us everything. That one's going to tell us where this guy fits, who this guy is, right? Feels like his rise to the championship opportunity, which came ahead of the first Brandon Moreno fight for Deiveson Figueiredo, was a little bit quick. It was a little bit good timing. And look, he looked very good against Jussier Formiga to earn that championship opportunity, to put himself in a position where he could be hustled into a championship fight. But it's been not great since, right? Hasn't made it out of the first round, hasn't beaten the scale a couple of times, a bunch of injuries, a bunch of sicknesses and illnesses and missed opportunities. So let's just see. if he's a contender, if he's deserving of the number that is currently next to his name, or a number next to his name, a single digit next to his name, he goes out and has at least a competitive fight with Manel Kape. I think he has the potential or the room to be sort of an RDA of this division, a Rafael dos Anjos for the flyweight division, where he's not quite the championship tier, but he's just that one step back and the guy that you have to beat if you want to be in that championship tier. He might still be a contender. He might not be either of those things. We haven't seen enough of him in the last 2 or 3 years to really make an assessment. A minute and change against Pantoja when he's getting just mauled doesn't give us anything. Let's see what happens against Kape at the end of March. And then we're going to have we may have to have a real conversation about Alex Perez one way or the other. Next up, Brandon Moreno, 2-fight winning streak, currently coming back from a broken wrist, as I mentioned, was scheduled at one point to face Amir Albazi, then broke the wrist. Listen, just get back soon, dude. We love this dude. I love this dude. Myself and Harry talk about him all the time, glowingly, smiling on the takeaways. He's 4-2 in the UFC. The losses are Moreno and Pantoja. And the first one, the loss to Brandon Moreno, people never seem to mention it or remember it. It came when he dislocated his shoulder. And so, look, the injury-prone thing worries me. The fact that he seems a little brittle worries me. But he's an all-action dude that, like, don't care who he's in with, doesn't care for his own safety at times, just bonkers, scrambles, get after it. Give me all of these people. Give me all of the guys like that. So get healthy, get booked against somebody exciting, and let's see you back out there. A couple more to go. Bruno Silva. He's 32 in March. He's on a 2-fight winning streak, both stoppages, but he hasn't fought since May 2021. He feels like a little bit of a, do you remember Bruno Silva? I was really surprised that we didn't see him last year. We didn't hear anything about why he wasn't fighting. And so as the note says, as my notes say, was on a good run, but then disappeared without a trace. So he's booked to fight Tyson Nam on March 11th. All the momentum is gone. And he had momentum. Those 2 wins came in really short succession. I believe they were 2 months apart. I think March and May, if I'm not mistaken. And they were good wins. He looked very, very good. And it felt like, okay, Henry Cejudo's longtime training partner is finally turning a corner and we're going to see something from him. And then Kaiser Soze, gone. The momentum's gone. But if he smashes Tyson Nam, it's back. And he's intriguing again. So let's see. Get me to March 11th and then talk to me after that. Brings us to Sumudarji. And look, I think if he fought anyone other than Matt Schnell on Long Island, he walks away from that with a stoppage win. But he faced the Louisiana Wolverine, who just took all the beatings and kept regenerating himself, and the adamantium saved him and the healing abilities saved him, and he came back to win that fight. I mean, you have to feel bad for the kid. He's 27 later this month. He has good size for the division, good power for the division. I think as he keeps gaining experience and getting more coaching and better coaching and just sort of working with more people, he has the upside to keep climbing the ranks. Yeah. I mean, I watched that Matt Schnell fight back a couple times earlier at the end of last month for a couple pieces that I put together and year-end stuff that I put together. Like, some of those shots are some of those shots are sitting down featherweights. I still don't know how Matt Schnell took them. It's befuddling to me. Look at me stumbling because it's crazy. He should have been upright. And so I want to see how that fight impacts his performance, because after not being able to finish, he got popped and then he got put to sleep. It can go one of two ways. You can look at everything up until the right hand lands that turns the fight on a dime and just go, look, we were all over a top 10 fighter, a guy that's got way more experience at this level than we do. Build on that. Anybody else, they're going down from some of those shots. Some of those elbows, in close that put him on skates. We figure out, we learn a little bit how to build on that, how to capitalize on that, and we're golden. Or you start doubting yourself and you start questioning yourself and wondering, Jesus, what have I got to do to beat these people? And you get in your own head. I hope that isn't the case. I hope Sumudaerji comes back and is focused and is like buoyed by that performance, because it was a great performance until Matt Schnell went Wolverine, and you just like, you can't do anything. You lose to Wolverine. What are you going to do? Let's see what he looks like in his next fight. Two left. Tatsuro Taira is the first of them. 12-0 overall, 2-0 in the UFC, 23 years old at the end of this month. Is right up there for me alongside Muhammad Mokaev as the top prospect in this division and one of the top 10 prospects for me in the whole of the UFC. Dominated Dana White's Contender Series competition in his rookie year. Now it's time for a step up, right? First year, 2 Contender Series grads, beat them both. Pretty handy in both. Finish in the second one. Get me in there with somebody more experienced. If we want to go hustle it and see, give him Tim Elliott. Let's just see what a fight between him and Tim Elliott looks like. Tim Elliott also not sure what his situation is, given the whole James Krause thing. Screwed up a lot of this division. Going to be a big story this year. Jesus, it's going to be a big story. But let's see what Taira looks like. If we want to do that, let's do that. Let's just get him in there with one of these top 15 guys. One of these super experienced guys. I think he can hang. Let's see it. We don't necessarily have to slow play this. Like, the division's interesting enough that we can hustle it, see what happens, and assess from there. If they do opt to slow play it a little bit and maybe take one step as opposed to 2 or 3, as I'm advocating for, maybe it is Alan Nascimento, somebody like that. That'd be really interesting to me. I think he's the goods. He looked so good against CJ Vergara. He looked pretty good against Carlos Candelario in his debut. 23 later this month. World of upside. Pay attention. Pay attention. Highlight the name. Circle the name. Write it down somewhere. Remember, I told you about him. Thank me later. Last one before we get out of here. Tahir Ulanbekov. Easy for me to say. 14-2 overall. 3-1 in the UFC. Sub Nate Maness quickly last time out. As I mentioned, earned a split decision win over Alan Nascimento earlier in his UFC career. Could have been a loss. Fine. It's 3-1 as it is. He's a member of that Team Habib crew. Tremendous grappler. And he fits with Nascimento as that potentially dangerous veteran guy, right? I believe he's 31. So he's a little bit older than a bunch of these emerging names that we're seeing that are under the 30-year-old threshold. Really curious to see who he gets paired off with next. The win over Nate Maness was just the high end of what you can expect from him. I think, like, just in terms of, like, when we talk about Ulanbekov and why he's somebody we should pay attention to, that's why. That effort is why. Because he can do that shit to guys that are very dangerous, like Nate Maness. So let's just see. As with so many fighters that we've talked about here going through the flyweight division, it is about matchup. It is about opportunity. It is about activity. He's somebody that needs to stay active. I would like to see 3 fights from him this year to get a real good read. Give him somebody in that lower third of the top 15, wins that. Give him somebody in the middle third, wins that. Let's get him in there in the top 10, in the top 5, excuse me. He's another one of those guys that we just have to test it. We just have to see. Hopefully he stays active. He stays healthy. He's able to compete a couple times and we're able to figure some of this stuff out. Those are the flyweights, men and women. Hour and 20 minutes. I appreciate you sticking around. I appreciate you riding these out with me. Listen, as I said off the top, this is the thing I love doing the most each year. It is so much fun. It is the embodiment of what I love about this sport. It is what I follow. It is my passion for this sport put forward for you. I hope you enjoy it. Hope you check out part 1. This is part 2. Part 3 coming tomorrow. We move to bantamweight, the absolute best division on the men's side of things. and a lot more shallow on the women's side of things, but we will still have a lot to talk about. Probably clock in right around the same amount of time, gunning for about 90 minutes if we can with these, for these bigger divisions, these tandem divisions. It's been fun already. I'm pumped up. I can't wait to put tomorrow's together. Thank you for watching. Support the crew, support Severe, support the YouTube, support the Patreon, SevereMMA.com/pints, the best URL in the business. It costs $1. It is well worth it. Go sign up. Follow everybody on Twitter. Like, rate, review, all of those things. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another. Know that we love you. We'll see you next time.